Are you going to the London Podcast Festival? Alongside the live shows, there's the Podcast Maker Weekend for beginners and experienced podcasters alike. I'll be co-hosting a session with Sam and Louise from the 90 Minutes or Less Film Fest podcast, and it's all about passion podcasts and fan shows. That's on Sunday, 15th of September at 12 noon. Get your tickets from podcastmakerweekend.com. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I try to find time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. Join me each week to hear about the wild birds I've seen, interviews with others, and stories from listeners around the world. August was a busy month for me, with a weekend spent at the Bird Fair, creating an episode for International Podcast Month, and preparing a session about passion podcasts for the Podcast Maker Weekend at the London Podcast Festival. More on these later. I haven't spent much time actively looking for birds recently. Most of my observations have definitely fallen into the casual variety. In this episode, there's a short bird walk that I recorded in London a few weeks ago. A recording I made one morning when I happened to look out of the window and saw my garden filled with birds. And an update on where you can find me, in life and online, over the next few weeks. These last days of summer are a busy time for birds, and some of the migratory species are already leaving our shores. Soon, the birds that spend the winter here will be arriving. Other birds will join together in mixed flocks, and that may provide the opportunity to see more unusual species amongst them. In early August, my routine was come home from work, and as dusk approached, I'd set out some dry cat food for the hedgehogs that have been visiting. I'd then stand outside and just enjoy watching the day turn to evening. Most times I would hear the screeching of the swifts as they flew around the neighbourhood, and the calls of the rooks and jackdaws on their evening commute, flying home to roost in a big flock. Once the hedgehogs arrived, I'd watch them for a little while before heading inside to eat. This past week, the first week of September, when putting out the hedgehog food, I've noticed the skies are mostly quiet before dusk. The swifts have now left and started their journey south on their way back to Africa. I may still catch the evening corvid commute, and I've heard a few blackbirds and a song thrush singing in the evening air. Because I spend my days in an office, taking some time in the evening to step into the garden keeps me in touch with the changing of the seasons, and it's wonderful to still see and hear the hedgehogs arrive as dusk falls. There are 3 or 4 different ones that come. I can tell one adult as it has a darker band of fur running around its body, between its legs and spines. There are 2 smaller hogs, one with paler spines and one with spines the same colour as the adult. There may be more, but they're the ones I can actually tell apart. We have a purposefully created hedgehog gap in the left-hand side of the fence at the back of the garden, and the hedgehogs have also dug a gap under the right-hand side of the fence. As darkness falls, I'll hear a rustling in the bushes near the holes, and out of the darkness a shape appears, running surprisingly fast across the lawn to where the food is. Once there, the sound of them crunching the food can be pretty loud. I've even heard it from inside the house. They'll stay for a little while, eating what they want, before they disappear silently into the night. A few weeks ago I was visiting London for a meeting, and afterwards decided to stop in a nearby square to see what birds might be there. Okay, so I'm in St John's Gardens in Westminster. I'm up in London for a client meeting and just thought I'd stop by on one of these little parks on my way back to the bus. And when I first looked around, I didn't actually think there was much here. I could see a feral pigeon, as you often get in these parks. Lots of flower gardens. But there is a songbird singing. And there's a magpie, as you can hear. There's possibly a couple of other birds here. So I'm just going to wander around the park. It's a very small square. It's probably, don't think it's even the size of a football pitch. It's got a few trees in it, some lovely flower beds, and an angry magpie. So just have a wander around and just see what else might be here. This is thinking back to the episode that I did with Dusty Gedge. He was pointing out how many birds you will see in an urban environment, and certainly, just having a little walk around the square, there'll be a few. So we've got the magpie. He's just landed on the lawn. It's a black and white bird, member of the crow family. Black head, black back, white sides, and longish black tail. Very cocky birds, very confident, and sometimes aggressive to other birds. So just looking around the trees now, there's all the city noises around me. There's a fountain in the centre of the park, and the gardens are set up around the fountain. A feral pigeon has just come in to drink from the fountain. This feral pigeon is one of the sort of brown and white ones, so you don't tend to see those colours so often. There was a songbird I could hear earlier. Just see if I can spot that as well. Magpie's calling out again. I can hear a blue tip. Just saw it fly across. That's in one of the smaller trees. Blue tit is one of our small tit birds. Blue and yellow, blue cap. This time of year they're probably a little bit duskier looking because the breeding plumage will have worn off a bit after it's fed its young, if they've bred. So one of the park's gardeners is about to water the plants. Let's see what else is here. So when I was speaking to Dusty, what he suggested was that these little parks act as kind of islands in amongst all of the buildings and traffic. So birds will fly from one to the other. It sounds to me like, is that the magpie? It can be the magpie, but it sounds a bit different. It's actually sounding a bit parrot-like, but I don't know that it's one of the parakeets. It's probably just the magpie just yelling. The magpie's certainly up there. I can't see if it's him making that call. Yep, no, I think it is the magpie. He's obviously annoyed by something. Okay, well I have to catch a bus, but it was worth having a little walk around and see what might be here. These are quite tall trees, so it could support some of the smaller birds. Wouldn't it be lovely to look up and just see an owl sitting on one of the branches? So I was standing here at the edge of the park, just about to go and get on the bus, and suddenly right next to me I could hear some leaves being turned over, and there's a blackbird in the bush just by me doing the classic blackbird thing, turning the leaves over, looking for insects and finding them by the looks of it. This is a female blackbird, I think. Yeah, it's a brown blackbird. A brown blackbird. It's definitely a blackbird, but it's brown. And it's turning over the leaves, and it's just visible in the bushes here. But I also heard something else call out, so I'm just going to have a look and see if I can see what that is. It's a bit difficult with all the traffic noise as well. It's quite hard to hear the birds. Maybe they have to call even louder when there's so much traffic around. Oh well, just wanted to record that there was a sighting of yet another bird. I'm not a city person. My favourite habitat would be woodland near cliff tops and the sea. However, I found it's definitely worth spending 10 minutes or so in these small city parks when the opportunity arises to notice the wildlife that makes use of them. Who knows what you might see? I had another wonderful casual birding moment a couple of weeks ago. I noticed a lot of bird calls in the garden while I was getting dressed one morning, and when I looked out, I saw a few blue tits in the garden. Then I saw some goldfinches and great tits, and I realised I could see lots of movement all around, and I recorded this piece while watching.
Just looked out the window to see what was happening in the garden, and my garden is absolutely full of goldfinches, great tits and blue tits. I can only imagine that there's a small flock that's come together. Blue tits checking out the nest box. There's 2 or 3 over there. I've got goldfinches, including youngsters, on the sunflower seed feeder at the back of the garden. On my main feeder, I've got 2 goldfinches, 2 blue tits and a great tit. The garden is just alive. There must be about at least 20 birds or more. I can see lots and lots of fluttering in the trees. I don't think I've ever seen so many in my garden at one time. I can't count them. There's just too much activity flying around. And unfortunately, I didn't have my camera up here, so I can't video them. I've just seen a robin land on the nest box and scare off the blue tits, but I'm sure the robin isn't going to be interested in the nest box. They're still checking it out. They've come back now and having a little look in the nest box. But these are youngsters. It'd be lovely if they decide to roost there over winter. I've got a goldfinch bathing in our water feature. Oh, a greenfinch has turned up as well. Wherever I look, I can see goldfinches, blue tits and great tits. And the one robin. That's just awesome. I really wish I'd had a way to visually show you all this. But anyway, I thought I'd just record it and let you know about it.
The garden was just filled with a mixed flock of birds. Straight after recording, I rushed downstairs to catch some video and photos of them. There were goldfinches and blue tits bathing in the water feature, and as I started to film, I realised one bird was different to the rest. It was an olive-greenish bird with a pale underside and thin beak. There were stronger splashes of pale lemon plumage on the vent and sides, and a noticeable eyebrow stripe. It was similar in size to the blue tits it was bathing next to. I could tell it was some sort of warbler, but I wasn't exactly sure what type. Potential birds in my suburban garden could be chiffchaff, willow warbler or garden warbler, and I looked these up on my identification apps. I couldn't be sure though, as all these birds look very similar. I was tending towards chiffchaff. I've heard chiffchaffs more than I've seen them. They have a distinctive call which sounds like their name. But this one wasn't calling, so that was no help. However, I was uncertain whether this was a chiffchaff because the plumage had a greenish-yellow wash and the app suggested their plumage was more brownish-grey. Luckily, I got a really nice piece of video of it bathing, and I posted it on Twitter to ask the opinion of others. Ewan, the Edinburgh birdwatcher, at @EdinBirdwatcher, confirmed it as a chiffchaff, as did @Toby Warbler, @BTO_GBW, the British Trust for Ornithology Garden Birdwatch, @Nature's Voice, and @Biggest Twitch. Thank you to all of them for responding. So that settled it. Chiffchaff. I was still interested how they confirmed it when the bird looks so much greener and yellower than my app illustrations or photos. So I asked Toby, what were the key things that led to his identification? He said that the green and yellow plumage pointed towards it being a juvenile from this year. Adult plumage around this time of year looks more grey and washed out. In addition, he said that chiffchaffs have black legs, which I didn't know, and this one did have, whereas willow warblers have orangey yellow legs. Some more facts about the chiffchaff. They are mostly migratory birds, arriving in the UK from the Mediterranean and North Africa in early spring, although there are reports of some staying through the winter. They eat insects like flies, caterpillars and moths, and often forage in the canopy of trees, making them quite difficult to see. All in all, I felt lucky to have noticed this bird, and was very pleased to have a new bird to add to my garden list, which takes this year's number of species to 25. To find out more about the birds mentioned this week, visit the bird guide at rspb.org.uk. In August, I visited the bird fair, which takes place at Rutland Water. It really is the most wonderful event, spread over 3 days, and I highly recommend it. There are talks by the leading names in conservation and birding, activities for youngsters, showcases for wildlife crafts, and opportunities to buy everything from birding vacations to optics to clothing and accessories. I was delighted to meet up there with Mark Carwadine and some of the other guests that were on his whale-watching tour in Mexico earlier this year, and past guest ATM, who created a beautiful painting of a spoon-billed sandpiper over a couple of days at the Leica stand there. And I also made lots of new connections, and I hope to feature them in future episodes, but I won't name names for now. During September 2019, I'm supporting International Podcast Month, a collaboration of podcasters from a variety of genres. I've created a special episode of the Casual Birder podcast, which will be released in their feed, a bird walk I recorded in San Diego earlier this year. My episode will be released in mid-September, but check out @podmonth on Twitter or internationalpodcastmonth.com to find out about all the wonderful shows and interviews with creators that are being released. There are several episodes of different podcasts being released every day in September. Do go and check out the feed. Are any of you going to the London Podcast Festival this coming weekend? I'll be there from the 13th to the 15th of September, watching various live shows and attending meetups. As I've mentioned at the top of the show, I'll also be co-presenting a session in the Podcast Maker series with Sam and Louise from the 90 Minute or Less Film Fest podcast. Our session is about creating passion podcasts and fan shows. If you see me, do stop and say hello. Be lovely to meet you. This podcast will be 2 years old in November, and to celebrate, I'm going to the Isle of Wight for a birding weekend, and maybe I'll be lucky enough to see the recently reintroduced white-tailed eagles. If any listeners are going to be on the Isle of Wight on the weekend of the 9th and 10th of November and want to join us, I plan to record a special bird walk there. Email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com for further information. I'd love to know what birds you've seen this week. Karen from Finland wrote, "The migration is in full swing here, and I've seen thousands of birds. In a large bay, there were mallard, widgeon, pintail, coot, hooper swans, mute swans, becoming more common here due to climate change, 2 white-tailed eagles, about 6 marsh harriers, a couple of Caspian terns, and a small flock of starlings. A young black-tailed godwit and a lapwing were still hanging around. Most had already left. Yesterday I was on a little heathy hill with forests around near the local dump, and there were ravens, hooded crows, a few formations of cranes flying over, plus hundreds of chaffinches on their way south. I saw a gorgeous kestrel too, and my first ever lesser whitethroat. A fantastic couple of trips, but I do feel pretty sad that so many birds are departing and winter is coming." Karen, that sounds absolutely amazing, and I do really look forward to hearing about what birds you see during the winter. The winter species are starting to arrive here on our shores, and I'm going to try and get out more over the winter to learn a bit more about the species that we might see. We'll have the redwing and fieldfare, and if I'm very lucky, we'll have some waxwings. If you've enjoyed this episode, please post about it on Twitter or share any of my social media posts with your friends. If you talk about the show online, tag me in your post. It's great to see news about the show getting around, and it helps it grow. Each Wednesday, I post a fun bird ID quiz on my social media channels, sometimes featuring photos from listeners, so do look out for that. Join our Facebook group to discuss this week's episode, or post your photos of the birds you've seen. I really do enjoy hearing your tales, so come and join the conversation there. Find us at facebook.com/groups/Casual Birder Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Casual Birder Pod or on Instagram at Casual Birder Podcast. And make sure you don't miss any episodes of the show by subscribing. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at www.dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder Podcast.